In 1300 BC, Egypt was the ancient world's primary superpower, commanding an empire of monumental architecture and staggering wealth. But that wealth was extracted through force. The entire state functioned on the brutal enslavement of the Israelite people, who were used as the primary tools for the empire's construction. At the center of this system was the pharaoh, a ruler worshipped as a living god. When Moses demanded liberation for the Israelites, he wasn't just asking for a labor reform, he was challenging the monarch's divine right to rule. Pharaoh's refusal triggered a sequence of 10 disasters that systematically crippled the nation. These events functioned as a verifiable ecological chain reaction and a targeted strike against every major deity in the Egyptian pantheon. Examining the science and the symbolism reveals how an oppressive state was dismantled piece by piece. The Nile was the source of all Egyptian survival, providing the water and soil necessary for a civilization to exist in a desert. The collapse begins with a toxic algae bloom, often called red tide. Under specific environmental conditions, these organisms multiply so rapidly they turn the water a thick, undrinkable crimson while suffocating the fish. This creates a biological domino effect. The toxic water drives millions of frogs onto the land, where they die en masse. Their rotting carcasses then become breeding grounds for massive swarms of lice and flies. This wasn't just a nuisance, it was a theological mockery. The bloody water humiliated Hapi, the god of the Nile, while the piles of dead frogs discredited Hecate, the goddess of fertility. By corrupting the river, the first phase of the plagues transformed Egypt's most sacred resource into a source of disease. The insect swarms from the riverbanks became vectors, carrying blood-borne pathogens directly into the nation's pastures. Historical precedents like the rinderpest virus show diseases spreading along a river valley, wiping out a nation's livestock. Living near infected herds meant the crisis moved into dense cities, where pathogens manifested as painful boils that crippled the human workforce. The state's gods of health were paralyzed. Hathor, the cow goddess, failed the herds, and Sekhmet, the goddess of healing, could not stop the boils. Even Pharaoh's magicians were too sick to stand before him. Striking the cattle and the citizens simultaneously, the plagues broke the physical strength of the empire. While the ground was in chaos, the atmosphere shifted. Geologists point to a massive volcanic eruption at Santorini, across the Mediterranean, as the likely catalyst. An ash cloud of this magnitude creates violent weather anomalies. In Egypt's desert climate, the result was unprecedented: massive hailstorms and continuous lightning strikes. The sudden moisture from these storms provided the perfect breeding ground for locusts, which swarmed to devour the few crops that had survived the ice. This culminated in a lingering cloud of volcanic ash that settled over the region, plunging Egypt into 3 days of total darkness. This darkness was a targeted strike against Ra, the supreme sun god and the personal protector of the pharaoh's divinity. With the sky blackened, Ra's power was neutralized. The god who supposedly managed the light was now invisible to his worshippers. When the sun failed to rise, it proved the Egyptian pantheon had been broken, leaving the pharaoh without any divine legitimacy. The 10th and final plague brought the most concentrated destruction: the death of the Egyptian firstborns. This biological escalation points to an ecological culprit. In a nation where grain stores were ruined by hail and locusts, firstborns typically held priority status, managing the remaining food or sleeping in protected lower levels. This cultural hierarchy likely turned into a death sentence, exposing them to toxic molds or gases concentrated near the ground by the previous environmental shifts. This event shattered the pharaoh's authority. It wasn't just a loss of life, it was an exposure of his human vulnerability, destroying the legacy he had built on the claim of godhood. With his gods discredited and his nation's infrastructure in ruins, the pharaoh finally yielded. The Israelites left their enslavement behind, marching past an empire that no longer had the power to stop them. Pharaoh's defeat proves that even the most imposing systems are built on fragile environmental and ideological pillars. When those pillars are systematically removed, the state itself ceases to function.